Hello and welcome to episode 6 of my education podcast, in which I interview great figures from the world of education from the last few decades. This particular podcast is with Nigel Talbot Rice, who many have told me was the great prep school headmaster in the 70s, 80s and 90s, and really set quite a template for the rest of the sector. He was actually my own headmaster too, and certainly you'll pick up in the interview the level of awe, if not of outright terror, I still found that I retained for him when I saw him again after so many years. We talked about his journey into teaching. We also talk about the difference between prep schools when he started to prep schools today. I tried to delve into his educational philosophy, what he believed to be really important, and we talk about his approach to behaviour, academics, and actually, what comes out is just how important he thought the religious aspect of what he was trying to do was, and also how important the financial aspect of being a prep school headmaster was too. I hope you enjoy it. I found that partly as a result of my status as a former pupil of his, imposed some restraints in the intimacy with which I could ask the questions, but I hope we overcame them, and certainly his reflections were fascinating and enjoyable to listen to. Thank you very much to him for giving up his time to do it. Thank you also to Dougal Gray of the band Juno Dream, who supplies the great jingle coming up. I should say just before then that the sound quality is by far the most dubious of the 6 episodes so far, resulting from having to do the interview in Nigel's hotel. It starts better than it ends, and I hope you can just bear with it. Thanks very much, and look forward to hearing what you think. Thanks, bye.
Do you want this recorded?
That'd be great. A question that I certainly don't know the answer to myself is what you did before Summerfields. You were headmaster there for 22 years, is that right?
Correct. You've done your homework well.
What was the story before that?
Is this on now?
Yes.
It suddenly goes on. The story before that, when I left Oxford, I'd done 3 years doing a degree like people do, and I wanted to get on and get a job. So I got a job at Papplewick at Ascot.
Yes.
Ran it through somebody. Did you go on any of the Christian camps at all?
No. But I was aware of them happening.
Yeah. Anyway, I used to go on the junior Swanage one, as in those days you were called officers.
Right.
I think they're called leaders now.
So they would take graduates from Oxford to go and run them, would they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A chap called John Edison, who really was he used to go around prep schools preaching a lot.
Right.
He was brilliant, and I was in touch with him, and he suggested Papplewick, and so I went there. 1961, September.
In what capacity?
As supposedly, originally, it came that I was going to be head of history at Papplewick, because the head of history was leaving to teach history at Bradfield.
So straight out of Oxford, you were appointed head of history, just like that?
Yeah, but I mean, that's nothing particular. Anyway, I'm quite glad to say that actually it didn't come to fruition, because Michael Kidson, who became a famous Beak at Eton, did not get the job, fell through at Bradfield, because the chap wasn't leaving or wasn't going on, whatever. So I didn't get that job, and I was asked to teach maths. To which I said, sorry, I can't teach maths, I haven't done it since O-level, and no. And correspondence with my head went on. I think we had 2 or 3 exchanges of letters, and then I thought, well, hold on, I better, it's my first job, you can't be too hoity-toity about it. So I agreed to do junior maths, like sort of first and second forms. Mm. So that started me off. I did 1 form of history.
Had you always wanted to be a teacher when you were at university?
Before that,
right.
I'll go back, actually,
yeah.
because it's not all. I remember I was at Charterhouse, you were at Harrow, I was at Charterhouse, and I remember my housemaster coming in to study. I think I must have been in the lower sixth, because I can remember where the study was, which meant it was the under sixth. And he said, Talbot Rice, it wasn't Nigel, Talbot Rice, what do you want to do in life? Have you any ideas? And I said, yes, I think I want to be a prep school master. I didn't want, of course I wanted to be a headmaster, but I thought that 18-year-olds saying wanted to be a prep school headmaster. So I said that to him, and he said, oh, can't you think of anything better to do? I thought that was extraordinary. He was not a very inspiring housemaster, perfectly nice. I never had any nastiness from him, but just rather uninspiring. Anyway, that did not put me off going into prep school teaching, and all through my time at Oxford, I had this sort of back of my mind, but I was open-minded that if, while I was at Oxford, something came up that took me away from teaching in a prep school, I would follow that. Nothing did. And in our little gang I was in Christchurch, about 6 of us or so. I was one of, I think, 3 who actually knew what they were going to do when they'd finished their finals. June, they didn't have to get anything straight away. Anyway.
Was that because you had such a great experience at prep school yourself? What had planted that seed?
Not particularly at that. No, I much enjoy these camps that I've been an officer on. And it was just something, I don't know, it was in my blood. I don't think my father, who was in the city, was frightfully impressed, but he never objected. He was the senior partner of Smith and Williamson.
Yes,
you've heard of them.
Of course, yes.
And Williamson
Huge firm.
was my grandfather.
Right.
So Dad was the son-in-law of one of the original partners.
So being a prep school master then had a certain cachet, but was still deemed not quite.
Oh yeah,
yes.
I don't know how much cachet it had actually, to be quite honest. But I went to Papplewick. I did 3 years there, and I always say I learned how not to be a headmaster there, because Peter Natchell Hugerson, a very nice, charming man, certainly full of charm, but he really sort of ran the school from, well, I don't quite know where, his Bentley that he had. No, he left it to us, and I, in the 3 years there, became quite a sort of, there were older masters, but quite a senior master, housemaster and that sort of thing. And I remember thinking, if I'm going to be a headmaster, I'm going to be a hands-on headmaster, not one who, he was so distant, so I then went to Summerfields.
And that was under Pat Savage, was it?
Yeah. First time I went there was in December '64.
Right.
To meet him and the Ogre and
he was known as the Ogre.
Pat Marston.
Pat Marston was, okay, right.
Was the Ogre. He was married to Purdy Marston, who was the granddaughter of Mrs. McLaren. So it was in the family, although they didn't have any money in the school.
Was he an ogre to staff as well as
boys? No. He I think the ideal thing had been that he would be taking over the school after the war, but sadly he became an alcoholic, and a serious alcoholic. By the time I got to Summerfields, he'd largely overcome that. He would drink ginger beer and keep off, because if you're an alcoholic, once you start on that, you have a drink, that's it.
So what was the culture like in the 60s at Summerfields?
Well, is there any sugar, please? Sugar? It was obviously different. It was, the teaching.
What would strike a contemporary parent or teacher as the most remarkable
well, I
thing
think
about
compare to the modern day, or when I was headmaster, the teaching was very sort of rote-minded.
Yes.
and not terribly inspiring. There were good teachers, obviously, like Jimmy Bell and people, and others, David Kidmay and so on. But it was unimaginative, and it was people who'd gone in to teach, possibly because they couldn't do anything else, or some of them. Not very inspiring. rarely. And
By
I
that stage,
remember this, there were 20 pages of school rules, which slightly typified what
yes,
it was like in those days. You might get that now because of health and safety.
but different
But
sorts.
I
yeah.
remember myself and one or two others, we formed a little committee with Pat Savage's approval to try and abbreviate the school rules down to one page, one side. And we did, you know, we got it. The first thing was, above all, use common sense, or something like
Right.
that.
Yes. Yes.
But they really, it was ridiculous. And it was a less homely atmosphere. I introduced tutors, and that's what I'm trying to make the thing smaller. But
So parents were kept even more at bay, were they?
oh, much more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I kept them at bay to a certain extent, but not to the extent. And no, it was, you know, parents were a necessary evil. In fact, one of the predecessors, I think, was it John Evans, who quoted, "Parents are a necessary evil."
Did you by that stage have a theory of education, either through your dip ed or Papplewick? Had you begun to formulate what you thought was important in
Well,
education?
through my time at Papplewick, I became quite, not keen on the maths, but quite keen on teaching it. I always taught the slower mathematicians, not the scholars. I never taught the scholars. And I had some quite, careful, I mustn't boast, but some successful common entrance results, both at Papplewick and at Salford. So, going back to when I started, that first year I was taking the sort of junior forms. In the second year at Papplewick, I was taking common entrance. And over that year, and the first year into the second, I sort of re-taught myself maths. You know,
right.
forgot what a fraction was, and all things like numerator and denominator and so on. So, and in a way, that helped to be able to get it over, because you reabsorbed it, not going back to your own school days.
It is interesting that you didn't like the look of rote learning when you first arrived. Was that where did that come
I
from?
won't say I didn't like the name. I think rote learning has its part
Yeah.
to play, very definitely, and I think those sort of modernists who wanted to get rid of it, education suffered.
Yes.
You know, particularly in the state schools, where they gave up rote learning. But you've got to have a balance. You know, it's now the thing, you've got to learn your tables.
Yeah.
And by learning your tables, you'll be able to do better mental arithmetic.
Yeah.
And you've got to learn your Latin grammar and that sort of thing. But that's only a small part of it.
Yeah.
And so I'm not against rote learning,
Yeah.
but there was far too much dependence on, you know, the history was taught by a great sort of list of dates. And
Yes.
tarot and card. Yep.
So would you describe yourself as almost a progressive when you first arrived?
Well,
at
I don't think I'd ever be described as progressive, but certainly
Or
a little bit more modern
a
than
liberator.
Salford's, because having been at Papplewick in New School, at Summerfields, things were very much, that's the way we've done it for years, and we'll go on doing it
For
that
decades,
way.
yeah.
And I do remember Pat Savage very politely saying to me after about a year that, "Nigel, I think we've heard enough about Papplewick." Because I, you know, at Papplewick we used to do this. You know, Papplewick. So I took the hint and tried not to make quite such a thing of it.
So you were made head after about 10 years at the school?
Well, it was interesting. I was going to buy a school,
Oh, right.
St Piran's at Maidenhead.
I'm
I'd
afraid
be
I
a
don't know this.
multi-millionaire if I had, because it had
Gosh, how interesting.
15 acres or 13 acres of prime
Yes.
land there. So if the school had failed, so I think to give you its value, they sold. Quite so while I was still headmaster, they sold, was it 3 or 4 acres for some ridiculous millions of pounds.
Right.
I can't remember whether it was 3 million or 9 million, but it was something, you know, it's a
So
lot
you knew
of
from,
money.
I mean, that you must have been in your 20s at that stage, were you? Were you-
No,
No.
because I was born in 38, so we married in 68
Right.
and lived out at Ensham, and I started after a year or a year and a half of marriage to look at,
Okay.
so there were a number of schools Joan and I looked at,
Right.
and it sort of, narrowed down to St. Piran's, and I told Pat Savage.
Was that because you wanted to lead a school or because you wanted to own a school, do you think?
Good question. I suppose a combination of both. I mean, I think and Nick Alridge was going to be in with me on it, and I remember we had a night down in Gloucestershire at, in Broadway. What's the famous hotel in Broadway?
The
Ligon Arms, that's right. So St. Piran's was the one. It was a Summerfields used to play them. Not a bad school at all. I wouldn't say it was a first division prep school, but it was certainly in the second division, depending on how long the divisions are, and nearer the top of it. So anyway, I remember well in the drawing room at Summerfields, the end of coffee, everybody was out of the room, and I said, Pat, I think I ought to let you know that you may be hearing from Liza Tibbets at St. Piran's, because I'm negotiating to buy it. That sort of set off a train of things, because he said, oh, that's a great shame, because there's nobody here who I think could succeed me. And he was very keen that his successor should come from within the school, as he had.
Yes.
Summerfields had never appointed from outside. Robin Van Thornton was the first one, and that was because one or two of the governors thought they ought to get away from this.
Right.
Which was, of course, in the end a mistake, but that's another story. So he talked to the chairman of governors, and it was quite a sort of prolonged thing. I mean, I progressed with and I was going to buy St. Piran's for £100,000, which my trust from grandfather Williamson just had enough in it. So you think that 100,000, and if I'd have been a businessman and wanted to sell up after 20 years, that would have turned into millions. But I wasn't in teaching to make millions.
No.
Anyway, cutting a long story short, various suggestions, Pat continued along the lines, I don't think it's in it, and it was suggested that I should be appointed assistant headmaster.
Right.
And this was in 1970/71, so it went on. So in Lent 71, it was announced to the staff that I was going to be appointed assistant headmaster.
Do you think that would have happened anyway, or was it just accelerated?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I don't think he'd sort of thought
Got that far, yeah.
And there was a staff meeting, and the chairman of the governors came round to say this was happening. And I was told, after a sort of deathly hush.
Sure. So when you were...
So that, I think that was in March 71 that it became official. I said I wanted to build a house, which I paid for, but the school had to pay back.
Right.
Beach House cost £26,000 in 1971, 72.
This was an assistant headmaster's house, was it?
Well, the idea was that it would become the headmaster, because there was no headmaster's house.
Right,
They'd all been bachelors. Pat lived in Little Cottage, but his predecessor had always been in Cottage, or in, like John Evans, in the main house.
Yes.
You know, bachelor accommodation.
Yes.
He and I were very different. He liberalised the school a lot from the previous regime, which was the cane. It was still a bit the cane, but not anything like as bad.
The cane was outlawed in 85, was it?
Yes, I think I felt it was ridiculous to have state schools banning it, and we couldn't. I'd used it, and when I look back, I think really, what good did it do? But it was the ultimate one, which for some boys was quite a good thing.
I mean, a telling off from you was probably worse than a cane, if I remember correctly. So, when you were taking over in 75, what were the key areas that you most wanted to put your mark on? I'm just thinking, was it academics? Was it...
Well, it was a mix of all, in a way, there, because first of all, as I say, I introduced the tutorial system, so that every boy had one person they could go to.
An ally.
It was a very bachelor establishment, very bachelor. I was the first married headmaster for 36 years when I became headmaster in 75.
And what were the peculiar problems with that?
Well, in a prep school 8 to 13, particularly at the younger age, you want the female whatever.
Yeah.
You probably won't, I'm sure you wouldn't remember it, but my last day sports day, when we had that big thing, and these parachutists came down.
Yes, I do remember that, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I said I hadn't got any great long-winded, high-powered speech to make, but I did say one thing which I think amused people. When I became headmaster, it was a very bachelor establishment. And over the years, it changed. And first of all, I found I was running a marriage bureau. A lot of people, Henry Phillips, Mark Johnson,
Rory Darling,
all getting engaged and married to females, either matrons or on the staff, like Jane Butler or Jane Johnson. Then I found I was having run very much a bachelor school to start with, a marriage bureau. We were getting plenty of women. And then I found I was running a fertility clinic because they were all producing children. So we went, and somebody said, well, you weren't much of an example having 5 children. But there we were. The main changes, I think, were one, to sort of move the school. My aim when I took over, I said, not publicly, but to myself, I want to prepare the school for the 21st century.
Right.
And the school was always in debt. When Pat retired in 1975, the accounts for that year showed a deficit of £2,000. And that's not a lot of money, but 2,000 then was much, much more than
Indeed.
now.
It does seem that
it had not made a profit.
Yeah.
So that was those two things. One, prepare it in all aspects for the 21st century, including, of course, the buildings, because there'd been hardly any building done since the earlier part of the 20th century.
It seems that capital development and fundraising was a huge part of what you did then go on to achieve at the school.
Well, I think yes. I mean, once you started with a building, you identify. Yeah, I mean, staff didn't have their own classroom, so staff moved around. The boys, if you were in Middle 5B, you had a Middle 5B classroom, and the staff would come to you,
come and visit you, yeah,
and. You couldn't set up your own, if you were teaching maths and you wanted lots of interesting posters, all that sort of thing, or history. None of that was possible. So it was pretty outdated. So all that one changed pretty rapidly by moving it into, not straight away because there weren't the rooms, but that was one of the reasons why we built the first Bolton block, which was really the first thing I did, I think. Yeah, I built Beach House, yeah.
So you had some space in the ground.
So that made 8 new classrooms.
Did you enjoy that quite pragmatic fundraising part of the role? I know you went on after Summerfields to keep on working in fundraising and that sort of thing.
I got a reputation, I think, because actually the parents at Summerfields have been so generous. By the way, for the microphone, I'm eating something, that's why it sounds so funny. It was rewarding to achieve what we did.
Yeah.
I never found it easy asking people. There are some people who, some fundraisers who
live for it. Yeah.
Perhaps they say exactly what they want from that person. Right, Mr. Ewing, I think we'd like 25,000 from you. No. But going back to your question, what else do we... I'm just trying to think. Ease on the discipline, in a way, make it... there were some people who... It still carried on, who just... a boy did something to annoy you, go and get the blackboard.
Yeah.
And the one who persisted more than anybody else on that was old Willie Pryor, who...
an addict.
I had him in the end, not right at the end, because he had a classroom in Bolton, but in the sort of earlier stage, I had him teaching near the study, and you'd hear the Willie Bates roaring. And of course, I knew that he really wasn't actually meaning it as he did, but there were little boys who obviously didn't yesterday, some would say, oh, it's a prior bait, or piggy they used to call him then. In your day was...
Piggy Pira, yep, definitely.
He was.
And he was very trigger happy with the black book, so I remember that.
He was, and I got to the stage of saying, when a boy came to the study, he wanted the black book, Mr. Pryor sent me the black book. I said, go back and tell Mr. Pryor that the red light was on, you couldn't come in. And so, by the time he got back, so Willie did calm down a bit in the end.
Just on that particular recollection, was the traffic light system your own innovation, or did that precede you?
Yeah, that was Pat Savage's brilliant idea.
Yeah.
So that was installed.
So evocative. I think a lot of Summerfieldians would just remember those lights.
Yes.
but about
I didn't use them much, and I don't. Pat used them a bit more because he didn't like being disturbed. So the red could be on, but not all the time. Red, yellow, green. Yes.
Discipline seemed such a finely developed system at Summerfields, and I think being able to incentivise behaviour just through reds and blues, and then with a black book. I mean, was that something that you worked on yourself, or did you inherit that system?
Yeah, the reds and the blues existed, but not to such an extent, I think. I mean, there were more blues than reds.
Yeah.
Really. And the reds were mainly for work.
Yeah.
Not for other things.
Yeah.
And so were the blues, actually, mainly for that.
What do you think that says about young boys, that they can be sort of nudged in various directions just by these small little dollops of praise?
I think certain boys can certainly be considered, but the others, it's like water off a duck's back.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody minds having the reds, but some others. What's the blue mean anymore? It doesn't really matter. So yeah.
It's interesting that you inherited a stricter school than the one that you then you left
It was
behind.
rather petty.
Yeah.
You know, the 20 pages of school rules. You could be had for just by doing any little thing. You know, have a that's a blue or whatever, or minus mark.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always told. People have said, in a nice way, you ran a tight ship.
Yes, yeah.
But I think you're running a school like Summerfields, and with the parents who are there, it's got to be fairly tight.
Yeah.
And I irritated fairly early on. I remember some father wanted his son to do something having finished common entrance, and I said no. He was really cross. The boy was going to Radley, and the father got Dennis Silk to get in touch, and I said, Dennis, once I let one go off and do this game, there's a lot they enjoy in the last period after common entrance. So I was quite, and also when I took over, there was a list of boys who couldn't have their hair cut at school.
On religious grounds?
No. on pure pride of I like long hair, and in the sort of late 60s, early 70s, long hair, even with 8 to 13-year-olds, thing. So I made that quite clear that I was not going to have that. You couldn't have it. So have your hair cut at home and at Levites, and if you don't, then you'll be taken over the we'll take them to one of the hairdressers.
Yes.
There were plenty of them in the summertime. So
Can you remember making any conscious compromises to parents if they petition you for particular exceptions, or your general rule was, I'm going to run this school, and if you want to have your son at the school, you will obey the rules just like your children will?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I don't think science is a bit of a martinet. I think you had to have clear and consistent sort of guidelines or whatever.
Yeah.
Parents at Summerfields were particularly delightful.
Yeah.
On the whole, there's always an exception, and just on that, again, in the years after I retired, people would say, "Do you miss it?" And I said, "Yes, I miss the boys, and I miss most of the staff, and I miss most of the parents." And that sums it up. I mean, I could count the parents who were irritating on probably one hand.
But they always remained, even over the 22 years, a small percentage.
Oh, very small.
Yeah,
Very small.
Yeah, yeah. What about hiring teachers? It'd be great to hear about some of the best teachers that you work with and
Well,
pointers.
it's much easier now because of the internet. In a way, the most important job, headmaster, amongst other things, is recruiting good staff. And it took time over the years. You can't, unless you're going to do what Richard Morgan did at Radley, was get rid of people, full stop. We didn't have the funds to do that.
You didn't like that policy?
Well, no. I the one or two I would have probably got rid of, but what one tried to do was to improve their, jazz them up a bit and say, look, and I would get, I think I better not mention any names, I'd get complaints about X or Y's teaching, and so I would have X or Y, and that, just telling them that there had been complaints,
would buck them up a bit.
I think it did, yeah. Although, quite honestly, somebody who's not a brilliant teacher can't be made into one by telling them that.
Who are some of the best that you work with? Or
Best
employed?
teachers?
Yeah.
Charles Churchill with his French teaching, which was quite, some people would say old-fashioned, but rarely, and that's more rarely good. Nick Alridge, of course, John Mayle, they were inspiring teachers. I'm just trying to think.
What do you think a young teacher in their 20s could...
And Mark Johnson, the youngest staff.
Yeah.
What would I... Sorry.
What could a young teacher in their 20s learn from one of those four about how to inspire?
Well, I think you've got to have, innately, you've got to have, one, the desire to teach and really be keen on imparting the knowledge, whatever it might be. And to a certain extent, you're born with the gift, or you've got that gift. You can't, as I said just a few moments ago, you can't turn somebody who is not going to be a good teacher into. But you can learn and pick up a lot over the time. And I think now, because the whole teaching is wider outlook, you do get people with more flair, able to use their own flair rather than having to be too rigid along certain lines.
Yes, yes.
I think at this age level there are certain people, Nick was one, who would definitely inspire X or Y. It's more in the public school age, I think, that you get the real... This chap Michael Kidson, who I took over from.
Just read the book.
Have you?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm quoted in that.
Oh yes, yes.
Now he became, particularly at Eton, at Papplewick, he was good. He was very good, but he wasn't obviously so inspiring as he became at Eton.
Yeah, yeah.
Because at Eton he had the older boys, particularly sort of their last 3 years, and he really was on their side. He was a very good teacher, but in his own particular way.
Yeah.
But there are more people now who've been brought up with more inspiring teaching, which has made them more inspiring. And who am I missing out? There are plenty of other teachers who are really good.
Mr. Bush, Mr. Bishop.
Yes,
Certainly fondly remembered.
Christian Heinrich in there, but they were all so much more sympathetic as teachers, not going, as I say, by the old talk and talk, or talk and talk. So, where else do we go?
Well, it'd be good to hear. You mentioned earlier about your Christian camps. How important was chapel in your role as a head?
Yes, now that's an interesting one. I mean, I took over Summerfield's very bachelor and very high church. The one thing I didn't do, because I knew it would be, Nick would be so cross if I'd given out an edict, stop all this ridiculous, because as they would go out of chapel, they would turn. And because when a little boy went there, but all the older boys would be doing that, they probably thought it was the thing to do. They would have evening, as well as morning chapel. They'd have evening chapel 4 days a week, I think. Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. I swapped that straight away.
Yeah.
Quite unnecessary.
Do you think Sunday chapel is just should always be there in a prep school as a kind of rootedness for the
Well,
week?
I think in a boarding prep school, yes,
Yeah.
I do. But I mean, maybe I'm old-fashioned. I was brought up going to church, and you know, for a lot of them, it's the only teaching of the Christian gospel that they will get.
Absolutely.
If it's done properly.
Yeah.
Fred and Siska, I think because I was quite sort of pushy at that stage, after 5 years they felt that they would like to go and retire properly, so they did. Because I was expecting people to work harder than they used to work, no doubt about that. The standards improved, but you know, it wasn't not that, but you could get away with minimum, really. You know, there were certain staff who would never take anything home in the evening to correct or anything like that.
It's a slightly corny question, but did you feel that you were a born leader? It sounds like you'd always...
No, I didn't. No. I don't think I am a born leader, really. But
you said you ran a tight ship. What did you learn about...
Can we finish on
the...
on
of course, the Christian side, yeah.
Christian side. So after that was Fergus Cappy. He was... Did you come across him? No.
Just Brian Gadd, yeah.
Fergus, Joanna used to take the children to St Michael at the North Gate. I don't quite know why not St Andrews, which is much closer. St Andrews, Linton Road, where we go now. And Fergus Cappy was at Wycliffe Hall and was doing his sort of teaching practice, so to speak, with the vicar there. And anyway, she said, why didn't I approach Fergus when he was getting towards the end and offer him place? So Wycliffe Hall is evangelical theological college, and Fergus was evangelical, but he gradually became, whether it was Summerfield's, but I appointed him, and yes, it continued the bringing down to earth. But yeah, I think now it's probably continued further. I don't know. There isn't a chaplain now, and I would guess they're not going to, unless somebody came who was really good, because they had somebody who, Robin had somebody who was a bit of a disaster. Certainly, I would have liked to have perhaps gone a bit further. Well, where we go to church now, they're not often robed, the clergy. And that's our son-in-law married to our third daughter, Becca. He very seldom, he's a vicar of a parish up in Preston, very seldom wears robes. I still like that, and I like hymns, although the campus one had choruses and that sort of thing. I certainly, and there were some good choruses. I think I was a mix of ancient and modern. See what I mean?
Yes.
Because that prayer book, I felt we needed something, and produced that with Fergus and David Langdon, and put in prayers, and I still use it, fun enough.
Right.
I use the prayer book on the council of St Luke's Hospital, and we start with a prayer, and they asked me to do it, and so I'm reading prayers from there.
From the Summerfield's prayer book.
I had, with the aid of Fergus, and I'm not sure David so much, but certainly we chose the prayers we put in there. And I think that was good, and certainly the whole chapel was lively, but it probably wasn't preaching the gospel quite enough. I used to get prep school heads on, and they were more
practical.
Well, they were trying in a way to sell their own schools. Not that they were doing that in the sermon, but a lot of them wouldn't have been Christians actually. No. So that was chapel, and I think generally became livelier. You know, they used to have too many sung Eucharists. Alternate Sundays with sung Eucharist or Matins, or even song. And I think, in a way, it was a good thing. We we're traditional, that's why I say ancient and modern. Traditional with things like the form of matins and even so. I remember talking about saying to our son-in-law, or to Becca actually, when we were staying up there for New Year, is it going to be matins? And they said, what on earth are you talking about? Matins?
What sort of moral failings would 8 to 13-year-old boys typically manifest that most need moral instruction, do you think? And
I suppose that the worst or the most frequent would be bullying, unpleasantness, and one would...
Could chapel help aid in the correction of that?
I'm not sure that it should have more than it possibly did. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do unto others as you have done unto yourself.
Quite.
Not sure. I only preached twice. That's where I was a bit shy about my own Christian belief. I'd never been brought up to sort of expound the gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if I was head now, I'd be getting more preaching of the gospel, or explaining of the gospel, and preaching, as well as the good old Bible stories. I mean, I probably taught you divinity in your first year.
Yes.
And my whole aim there was actually to get children who probably hardly heard of the Bible understanding the good Old Testament stories as well as the New Testament. Yeah.
So if you were taking over a school this year, what would be the changes you'd want to bring in 2018? I mean,
you're asking an almost 80-year-old.
I mean, do you think single sex has had its day? Do you think boarding's had its day? Do you think?
I don't think boarding's had its day. No, I mean, a lot of schools were having difficulty getting 8-year-old boarders when I retired.
Yeah.
But when I retired, I was turning away, in 1997, I was turning away 8-year-old boarders.
Yeah.
Because we got the reputation, it had built up all right. I'm going to have a sip of water.
Yes. I'm interested to whether you think new times require new methods and whether the boarding prep school will survive over the next few decades.
Well, I think what is interesting, if I suppose this is being a bit political, not political, but Ludgrove and Cot Hill are still getting, although not probably quite as easily, they're still getting the 8-year-old boarders.
Yeah. So what's the sort of distinctive opportunity that a prep school could offer parents today that they couldn't get at a London day school or flexible?
Well, I would say, I mean, from that point of view, we got a lot of prospective parents coming from London.
As what my parents were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I would say to the mothers, you've got to be unselfish. You see all that we've got on offer here. I tend to say this at the end. All that we've got. You think in London, if you're going to achieve a quarter of that, you're going to be in the car driving him here, there, and everywhere. You've got it all on them. We're much more parent-friendly. You can go out leave-outs every 3 weeks, and credit system, which I introduced, meant that there was contact, come to matches. But I felt the matches were all very well. If you were in teams, then your parents could come. So that's why I introduced the credit so that people could go home or go overnight on a double credit. And I think that helped. It was a matter of being aware of the market and maintaining. I remember we built up after 2 or 3 years as... No, it must have been a bit longer, but there was an article about schools in the weekend Telegraph magazine. Summerfields was the in school. And then another article years later, this is where networking begins, again referring to Summerfields. And I think our best recruits were, of course, through the parents.
Thanks, bye.